September 13th at the Dayton Raquet Club. The Dayton Informer attended a meeting called Spark, and what Spark is a monthly meeting it's an outgrowth of Leadership Dayton, which is a group of business professionals, part of the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. The purpose of the Spark meeting is for different business leaders and organizational professionals to present ideas, to spark a conversation, essentially. This past Tuesday, Michael Lause of the Dayton Silverbacks Indoor football team, who currently play at Hara Arena, presented the idea of building a indoor sports arena in Montgomery County, and specifically Dayton. And with him, he brought a gentleman named Tom Chema. Mr. Chema has been on the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. He serves as the president of Hiram College, and he also operates a consulting firm called Gateway Consulting, which has been involved in stadium projects all across the USA.
Tom's more the guts and the glue of this, so we're going to be talking about that. Basically, what I'm going to do is basically just kind of bring you aware of some of the other things that have been going around in other cities very close to us, and some of their development. And basically what Tom would be doing would be kind of talking about some of the things and making that happen. And one of these facilities is one that Tom and his company were directly involved in. You may have heard that we've had professional indoor football teams here in Dayton before under different names that were their business models were not conducive to long-term growth and existing for very long. We're trying to get outside of those and actually excel upon those limitations. And what we strive to do is to be a strong community asset both on and off the field. Our main demographic in arena football, the prime one that we draw is male 35 to 49. The next one is right up the road, up 75 in Toledo. It's called the Huntington Center, and Tom can kind of speak about this. His firm was directly involved in the development of this project.
The Toledo project that Chema was involved in, originally, we looked up in the Toledo Blade. The original Toledo arena was proposed construction costs of around $62.26 million, according to this article. And in the end, that project ended up costing over $100 million.
In fact, that's kind of how the whole conversation started. I have contacts with the Toledo Walleye and also with the Toledo Mud Hens from my days up when I attended Bowling Green that are still with those organizations now and actually got the conversation started, and that's how we met Tom. We got to talk with Tom, and that's why Tom's here today, because basically my theory is if it works up there, why can't we do it here in Dayton? Last one, and this one is actually a direct correlation to us in Dayton, is the new facility in Evansville, Indiana. Evansville is a member of the Central Hockey League, which is the same league that the Dayton Gems are in. So basically, they're actually in the same conference. So they'll be using this facility this year. Their capacity there is 11,000. That'll be used for University of Evansville basketball. That'll be their primary facility. It will be used for the Evansville Icemen for hockey and various concerts. Okay. The mayor of Evansville told the Rotary Club that the new arena will cause economic benefit. It will create community pride, quality of life, more events, and jobs. It will not, in their particular situation, they do not use property taxes to build, and it was wiser for them to build a bigger arena than renovate an old one that would not attract large acts. Their current arena only had a capacity of about 1,500. So that was the reason why they did bring up the fact of trying to renovate that, but they decided because they felt that they could have an economic impact with what they were building, that could have been, that's why they went to that.
Michael Lause, representative from the Dayton Silverbacks, said the team was averaging 1,500 fans per game and is currently profitable, quote, at their current economic model. When asked about his team's payroll model, Lause said that the team has a $2,500 budget per game for the entire team. Also noticeably absent from the presentation were any representatives from the Dayton Gems hockey team. Must also be noted that when pressed for more specific questions about the economics of his team, Spark moderator Larry Cooper jumped in to end questioning at that time.
Because if the tenants don't make money, the building's not going to make money. So first, the building has to make money. Second, the tenants have to make money. And third, to make the building really work, you have to figure out how it's going to be paid for. I heard on a number of occasions by folks whom we've told not to build buildings. The city of Las Vegas hired us to help them with spring training complex, and we convinced them to let us help them decide whether they really wanted to do a spring training complex, and the answer to that was no. It wasn't going to work in Las Vegas. We were hired by the city of Mansfield here in Ohio. They wanted to do a minor league ballpark, and we convinced them to let us do a feasibility study, and the end result of that was they shouldn't do a minor league baseball project. It was going to be an economic mistake if they did so. We pride ourselves by help our clients have projects that are successful. And for the most part, that is when you look at wanting to do an arena or a ballpark or a stadium, it really doesn't matter, any of that genre of things. One is that the building, once it's up and operating, has to pay for itself. Because very few people are interested in subsidizing the operation and maintenance of a building like this. So that is key. Before you build this building, you want to have an analysis done of whether that building can pay for itself once built. Secondly, building an arena is going to have one or more principal tenants. It's going to be a football team or a hockey team or college basketball or some variety of those, maybe multiple principal tenants. Those tenants have to be profitable. If they're not profitable, they're not going to continue to play. They're going to either go out of business or move, and people are not going to be happy. And number one is going to suffer too, because if the tenants don't make money, the building's not going to make money. So first, the building has to make money. Second, the tenants have to make money. And third, to make the building really work, you have to figure out how it's going to be paid for. In the United States of America, there are, I don't know how many arenas, several hundred arenas. There are 4 of them that paid for themselves completely. 4 out of hundreds, 500 probably. Those 4 are the Staples Center in Los Angeles, the United Center in Chicago, a little building in Worcester, Massachusetts, and one in the Quad Cities, Iowa, Illinois. Most buildings cannot pay for themselves. And in fact, these buildings are called public assembly facilities for a reason. One of the reasons is that the public usually is subsidizing the building. And historically, in the United States, the public has subsidized the original design and construction of the buildings, and often, unfortunately, has to subsidize some of the operation of the building. Since the 90s, in the modern era of building these buildings, the public has been less and less interested in subsidizing the operations, but continues to be willing to subsidize the actual design and construction. So most of these buildings are publicly owned. A city, a county, in a few cases a state, or some enterprise that has been put in place in the place of the city, the county. In Cleveland's case, for example, a private not-for-profit corporation called the Gateway Corporation owns the Jacobs Field and Progressive Field and the Cube. But that entity is sort of a joint venture between the city and county, the city of Cleveland and county.
In order to help get funding for the projects of a baseball stadium and basketball stadium in downtown Cleveland, Chema was involved in a campaign to pass a sin tax on alcohol and cigarettes in the city. In their book, Public Dollars, Private Stadiums, The Battle Over Building Sports Stadiums by Kevin J. Delaney and Rick Eckstein, both Rutgers University professors. The two detail the story of how the business community in Cleveland were able to outspend opposition to the sin tax in the stadium by 10-1 and win the election by 1.2%. But at the time of the election, estimates for the stadium were given at $344 million and ended up with a final tally of $462 million. We found it quite interesting when interviewed by the authors of the book, and quoted in the book on page 73. If you Google Public Dollars Private Stadiums Thomas Chema, Chema said, "It was stupid to say a figure because I didn't know. I didn't have a clue what this project was going to cost because we had no money, no organization, nothing. We didn't have a design. All I knew was that in Chicago and Baltimore, they were building stadiums for roughly X amount. They told me a certain number, and they lied. I knew a certain number of arenas had been built for a number. So take those numbers and ramp it up for inflation for a couple years, and I take a look at labor costs in those cities versus Cleveland, and I put in a function for labor and throw in $20 million for property, and voila, I get $344 million. That wasn't a real number. I didn't want to say that number. I tried to avoid saying that number, but when you were in an election campaign, you have to put a number on it." Quote, unquote, Thomas Chema in the book Public Dollars, Private Stadiums, The Battle Over Building Sports Stadiums.
The reason that these buildings can't do all that you want them to do is, one, they're very expensive. You saw Mike's charts a few seconds ago about the cost of building these buildings. The actual construction cost of these buildings is expensive. Two, there are only so many dates that you can put events in. Three, there's only so much expendable income that people have that they're willing to expend on these kind of entertainment. And four, there's usually a lot of competition for those entertainment dollars in a given market. You almost always, except in poor cases, need some sort of public subsidy to cause these buildings to be created. Our objective as a consulting firm is to cause items number 1 and 2 to be taken care of, so that there isn't any ongoing subsidy, and that the only subsidy is where does the dollars come from to originally build these buildings. Now, if you decide you want to build a building, what do? Well, I would suggest that the first thing is to do what those folks in Las Vegas and Mansfield, Toledo, Evansville did, and that is to do a real feasibility study. To engage someone, Gateway or someone like us, to analyze what the economics of your building are. And that analysis really is a market analysis of what the Dayton market is, what your competition is, and you have a lot of competition in this area, as I think you probably know, where dollars are going to come from, what people's spending patterns are relative to entertainment, and whether you have some anchor tenant possibilities that will generate the base dollars to make the buildings operate in the black. If the answer to that is yes, then it gets a little more complicated, because then you have to try to figure out where the money is going to come from to build it in the first place. And probably, if Dayton is like most other communities in the United States, and I suspect it is, you're going to need some public subsidy. And that public subsidy comes from a variety of different forms. In Toledo, for example, to do the arena, the county commissioners restructured and increased the bed tax, the hotel-motel tax. Generated from that tax about $52 million as the base for building that building, which cost just about $100 million. It was also a subsidy from the state of Ohio through the state's capital budget and an institution called the Ohio Arts and Sports Facilities Commission. The state contributed about $13 million to this project. The feds, who almost never contribute to these kind of projects, ended up about $2 million for this building through a transportation grant. And we cobbled together little pieces of money to make up the difference. And that's typical. The Toledo example is pretty typical of arenas, except with one big exception. In Toledo, the Toledo Mud Hens, the baseball team, and the Walleye, the hockey team, are both private, not-for-profit corporations that are owned by the community. The community basically owns these teams, and all the net revenue flows from the team back into supporting the original construction of the building. We almost always recommend that, regardless of the size of the building or what you think you're going to have in it, that you put permanent ice in. Because trying to go back and redo it, if you get a hockey team later, or you want to do ice capades on a regular basis, or Disney on Ice, or any of those things, way more expensive to do it on a temporary basis than to build the building right. But ice, 5,000 seat building nominally, you can probably do one of those for as, now I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to violate one of my cardinal rules. When I talk to people, especially early on in the process, I always try not to give dollar figures out about what your building will cost. Because there's one thing I can guarantee about whatever the first number is that is put out there about your building, it's going to be wrong. I don't know whether it's going to be high, it may be low, but it won't be right. Because until you do an architectural program, until you have a design and a site for that design to be built on, there's no way to know what the cost is. All you can do is use averages from other buildings. So the numbers I'm not going to give you are kind of averages from other buildings, have nothing really to do with what you might do in downtown Dayton. A 5,000 seat building could be done for as little as $27, $28 million. More likely it's going to be closer to $30 or $35 million. A building that is in that middle size, like Toledo, 6,500 to 9,000 seats. The range is, say, 70 million to 95 million. There were a couple peculiar things in the Toledo project. The cost was $100 million. I can't conceive that you would be thinking about doing one of those big buildings. That just doesn't seem to be in the cards. I'm not even sure that the mid-sized building is right for you here. Would have to do an analysis of that to be sure, but I can't conceive that you would be thinking about doing one of those big buildings. That just doesn't seem to be in the cards. I'm not even sure that the mid-sized building is right for you here. Would have to do an analysis of that to be sure, but just knowing the other facilities that you have in the region, the Nutter Center, the facility down in Cincinnati, just sort of looking at the competition, it would seem to me that you probably don't even want to be in that mid-size, that what you might want to think about is a smaller building, somewhere maybe maxing out in that 5,500 seat rate. You decide you want to go forward, you can figure out where the money's going to come from. Then what you want to do is figure out who your principal tenants are, enter into long-term agreements with them, get some commitments from them to support this project, both on an ongoing basis and capital-wise. You've got to decide then what the program for the building is. You're going to have suites, club seats. Is it going to have, if your tenant is hockey, obviously you want, in my opinion, permanent ice. What else are you going to do there? Where's the stage going to be for concerts? Are you going to have flexibility that you can put the stage in the middle or one or both ends? Where are you going to locate it is the next issue. What is the site? Site means everything. Now, this is a real estate play in a way. Location, location, location. And location matters on who your tenants can be and how profitable they can be. Location really matters on what kind of sponsorships you can generate, and is the overarching factor in getting a real good naming rights sponsor is where that location of that building is and how much visibility it has. I think they work best when they are downtown, and they work in existing neighborhoods where you can hopefully avoid having to build a lot of parking. Parking gets very, very expensive. In this building, we built a grand total of 0 parking spaces in Toledo. Not a single new parking space that we built for that building. We took advantage of existing buildings.
Another article from the Toledo Blade we found really interesting was about parking, and that was a part of the discussion is the lack of need for parking in building an arena such as this. But one of the sources that we found that was quoted in a Toledo Blade article came from the Urban Land Institute. And we got looking at about who the Urban Land Institute is as a source to justify this. And the Urban Land Institute consists of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Bank of America, Ernst & Young, John D. Catherine MacArthur Foundation, Price Waterhouse Coopers, Rockefeller Foundation, and the Wells Fargo Foundation as funders.
You have these issues of where it's going to be, who's going to play there, what the program is going to be, and then you go about hiring an architect, or a series of them. You should hire some people who are skilled in urban design so that the building can be integrated into the fabric of the downtown. Then you will hire a construction manager and an operator for the arena. To have, I think, somebody who has enough clout in that industry. That is, they manage a whole bunch of other buildings. And so when Madonna wants to play in Toledo, you want to get her down the road to Dayton, and you might want to have the same operator in those buildings so that you have the clout to try to bring those kind of acts in. You need the base tenant, the football team, to be the base support, but the gravy, the profit, is going to come from all the other things you do in the building. I would also suggest one other thing that often is relevant in an urban setting. Certainly it was in Evansville and Louisville and in Toledo, and that is, can you link an arena building in with convention center and with your convention activity? Can you put it in a place that is at least close enough to the convention center, if you have a convention center, where you can utilize the building as an adjunct for flat floor exhibits and other meetings? Can you team these things? Can you put the building in close proximity to other entertainment activities? Here you have a very nice little ballpark, not too far from us here. Is there a site anywhere near that ballpark where you can kind of team these things so that you maximize the spin-off economic development that comes from building a building?
Just curious, the Huntington Center, you talked about subsidizing and so on and so forth. Is there public subsidy right now, and if so, how much?
Well, there was a big bunch of tax money from the motel tax that underwrote the actual cost of the building. But no, they have no ongoing subsidy of that building for operation. The building is paid for itself. Pro forma, when we pro forma the building, we thought that the building would generate about $750,000 net of all of its costs. And in fact, in its first 2 years, it generated about $2 million net of all of its costs. So it's performing way above our expectations. Now you try to be conservative. You don't want to sandbag, but you want to be conservative in the pro forma.
And how much was the increase in the lodging tax?
I don't remember that. I'm sorry. I can find that out for you, but I don't remember. There's a state maximum, and I believe that they pushed the tax to whatever the state max is, but I don't remember what that is. Yes.
In these areas where these venues have done well, do they have other competition? I mean, we do have a lot of other arenas in the area. I mean, are these the sole arenas for concerts and things? That would be the primary location?
They're usually the sole arena or venue of its size in a given area. But in a community, you want to have multiple size. There's some concerts and entertainers who want to play to a 2,600 house, and others who want to, in the last several years, there have been very few stadium events. There have been very few touring. The Beatles and Michael Jackson aren't with us anymore, and the Rolling Stones are too old to play in the stadium. So there haven't been very many of those concerts. I think U2 is the last big one that's been out there. Most entertainers, even the Lady Gaga types, they are more interested in something in the 6,500 seat venue now. And that can change.
You said at one point that location was very, very important. visibility, access, parking. I don't know what you said you did in Toledo with adding no parking, but for most downtowns that would be very, very difficult. How, and you say you like downtowns and you've had successes with them, how on earth do you get these groups to go in the core of a city when you've got interstates with great access and visibility where they could go? How do you sell that?
Okay, the first thing to know about those great interstate intersections, I'm going to give you a couple examples. Did you ever go to the Ridgefield Coliseum up in the Cleveland area? It was halfway between Akron and Canton. Wonderful building. Ridgefield Coliseum, 20,000 seats. Right at an intersection off Interstate 271. You can't get off 271 to the building.
Some of us were there that first time with Frank
Sinatra. And some of those people are still on the interstate. That's a problem. Give you another example. You ever go to
that's a special case.
Well, it's. I'm going to come back to your
Okay.
question specifically, but let me give you a couple more examples because this is important. You ever go to the Redskins FedEx Field or whatever it's called near Washington? Be prepared to spend 3 hours traveling each direction. It's right off an interstate. That is the worst place to put one of these buildings. What you want to do is site these buildings with a traffic grid. And almost every downtown, with the exception of San Francisco, Boston, and Pittsburgh, have grids. Okay? And Dayton does. That's important because when you come in, you can come in from all directions. And even more important, when you want to go home, you can spread in all 4 directions and get out and get into the flow of traffic. So you don't want to be off an interstate unless you can figure out how to make 4, 5, 6 exits off that interstate. And the state isn't going to pay for that.
So if you're way off an interstate in the core of the city, where you've got some one-way roads, some two-way roads, no visibility from major highways for the most part, no real parking, but you're saying you can convince big teams to do that?
Since the 1990s, virtually everyone has.
Okay.
I mean, I can't think of a half a dozen examples of the opposite, of people going out into the burbs. It's all come back. We brought the Cleveland Cavaliers from Richfield Coliseum to downtown Cleveland. The Toledo Mud Hens went from Maumee, right off the turnpike, to downtown Toledo. This Louisville building is downtown. The Evansville building, their old building, is out in the burbs. They're downtown. The unique things, I told you there were a few little pockets of money we captured for this building. One of the unique things we did in Toledo is I convinced the parking garage and lot owners within, I forget how many, a dozen blocks of this building, that they should contribute to the construction of this building by giving us, I think it was $1.13 per space per year for 15 years. Because they weren't going to get squat out of that space unless somebody came and did something in this building, and they're happy. They're even if they're charging $3, they're netting $2, and they're giving us $1. Parking is important, but people misjudge the parking situation. And for the most part, there's plenty of parking in downtowns. What you don't want to do, if you want to have some spin-off economic development, if you want to create some retail, some other entertainment, bars, restaurants, coffee shops, you don't want to put a building downtown and then surround it with a sea of surface parking that forms a moat separating those restaurants from the building. If we come out of a building like this and get in our car, we go home. We never do anything else. We don't go to a restaurant. We don't stop someplace on the way. We get in the car and go home. So what you don't want to do is create the siting of the venue and the way you design it in a way that people come, park as close to the door as they possibly can, get out of their car, go in the building, enjoy the event, get back in their car and go home. What you want them to do is walk 5, 10, 15 minutes from where they parked their car to this building, past interesting things. A bookstore, a coffee shop, a bar, whatever. That's how you create the spin from these buildings that generates a multiplier effect of economic development.